July 28, 2024, 2:25 a.m. The Black Sea was silent, calm, and deceptively still. Aboard the Ukrainian drone command vessel, the atmosphere was pure tension. Officers stared at sonar readings and encrypted drone feeds, tracing digital whispers in the dark. They weren't looking for a fleet. They were waiting for a signal, one that Russia would never intend to send. Hetman Ivan Mazepa. For weeks, Ukraine had tracked irregular Russian patrol patterns near Crimea. A silent chess game had formed beneath the waves. Russia, confident in its electronic warfare dominance, deployed vessels under radar blackout, shielded by jamming ships and patrol escorts. They believed their movements were invisible, but Ukraine had been listening. From sea-skimming drones to submerged sensors, Ukraine had built a layered digital net. Every frequency shift, every GNSS drift, every radar pulse was mapped and predicted. What Russia saw as security, Ukraine saw as a blueprint. Now, their moment had come. A Russian patrol ship entered the Reddit corridor, shadowed, alone. It was exactly what Ukrainian Naval Command had waited for. The order came in silence. No alarm, no voices, just green lights and activation codes. Dozens of unmanned systems moved into position: surface drones, subsurface drones, airborne jammers, each with a defined role, each linked in perfect coordination. This would not be a naval battle. It would be an ambush, a trap built from code and silence. This is the true story of what happened next. These were Magura V-5 naval drones. Each one had been deployed hours earlier and had waited on silent approach vectors, coordinated through an encrypted satellite link. They advanced in formation at sea-skimming altitude. One focused on the radar mast, another on the engine housing. The others locked onto structural points across the hull. At 2:33 a.m., the strike began. The lead drone hit the bridge, instantly destroying comms and navigation. Moments later, two drones breached the aft propulsion unit, setting off secondary fires and killing power to the stern. Within seconds, the ship was adrift. A fourth drone detonated just below the waterline, triggering rapid flooding in lower compartments. Damage control was initiated, but within 90 seconds, the crew was overwhelmed. The fifth drone targeted the ship's close-in weapons system. It exploded beneath the gun platform, disabling the Ivanovets' only active defense. The sixth drone hovered for 7 seconds, confirming thermal readings on board. Then it dropped directly into the forward magazine. The explosion lifted a section of deck into the air. Black smoke engulfed the ship. By 2:39 a.m., the Ivanovets was burning, disabled, and drifting. No distress call had been sent. No weapons had been fired. Ukraine had eliminated the target without a single shot from a manned platform. Satellite confirmation showed the vessel listing, powerless, with visible structural failure midships. But this wasn't the end. It wasn't even the goal. Ukrainian analysts monitored Russian fleet behavior constantly. They knew what came next. A response, a rescue, a recovery mission. The Ivanovets had served its purpose. It was bait, a sacrificial piece in a much larger operation. Ukraine wasn't hunting one ship. They were hunting the pattern. And as Russian command prepared their next move, Ukrainian drones were already in position to strike again. At 2:41 a.m., just 2 minutes after the Ivanovets went dark, Russian Fleet Command flagged the ship as non-responsive. No radio return, no AIS ping, no satellite verification. Immediate concern triggered a rapid response order. The closest vessel, the patrol ship Sergey Kotov, was redirected to investigate. It was stationed 35 nautical miles to the east, outfitted with enhanced radar and standard rescue equipment. Russian command still believed this was a mechanical failure or an isolated accident. Ukrainian command knew otherwise. Analysts had modeled Russia's emergency deployment protocol. They anticipated the response timing, the direction, and even the approach vector. 4 new Magura V-5 drones were launched the moment the Kotov left station. 2 more had already been loitering near the Ivanovets' wreck. All drones were coordinated using line-of-sight UAVs and satellite tracking. At 2:52 a.m., the Sergey Kotov entered the designated strike zone. The crew aboard scanned surface debris and prepared recovery gear. There was no visible threat. That changed instantly. The first drone struck low on the starboard engine casing, knocking out propulsion. A secondary fire broke out below deck. The ship slowed to a drift. Moments later, a second drone hit the aft port corner, targeting the backup generator room. It exploded on impact, and flames surged upward through the ventilation shaft. The command deck reported power fluctuations and navigation failure. Crew members activated emergency procedures, but coordination faltered. A third drone approached head-on, targeting the radar dome. The blast ripped through the mast and severed primary tracking. The bridge was plunged into partial darkness. Smoke and confusion spread. No return fire was recorded. The fourth drone delayed its attack by 20 seconds. It hovered, waiting for the ship to initiate countermeasures. When none came, it dropped directly into the main helicopter hangar, detonating near a refueled Ka-27. The resulting explosion destroyed the aircraft and knocked several crewmen unconscious. By 2:58 a.m., the Sergey Kotov was dead in the water. Engines gone, communications severed, fire on board. Ukraine had claimed its second ship in under 30 minutes. Still, no Ukrainian manned vessel had approached. No fighter had taken off. The Russian Navy was under attack, but it still had no target to aim at. And Ukraine was already preparing for Phase 3. By 3:04 a.m., Russian command was escalating. 2 ships lost contact. No distress signals. No combat reports. This was no accident. It was a coordinated ambush, but the enemy remained invisible. Moscow authorized deployment of the Cesar Kunikov, a Rapucha-class landing ship equipped for damage control, recovery operations, and amphibious response. Heavier than its predecessors, it carried a large crew and reinforced hull plating. Its mission was simple: reach the zone, rescue any survivors, and assess damage. Ukraine expected this ship to arrive next. They had predicted the rescue doctrine down to the minute. Magura VIF-5S drones with reinforced warheads had already been staged in a new kill zone between the Ivanovets and Sergey Kotov wrecks. Decoys were also deployed, floating debris fields, false thermal targets, and spoofed distress signals. At 3:17 a.m., the Cesar Kunikov slowed as it entered the zone. Surface crew deployed small boats. A Ka-29 helicopter was spun up for launch. Everything followed protocol. Then came the first strike. A drone hit low, directly beneath the loading ramp. The blast knocked out hydraulics and jammed the vehicle bay doors. Smoke poured from the stern. 30 seconds later, a second drone struck the forward hangar deck, where fuel drums had been stacked for emergency refueling. The explosion sent burning shrapnel across the bow. Crew rushed to contain it, but systems were failing. A third drone took a steep dive and hit just above the engine compartment. Internal power flickered. Damage control teams attempted to isolate the fire, but by now, 2 compartments were flooding. The fourth drone aimed higher. It exploded above the bridge canopy, penetrating the top deck. Command systems went offline. The ship's leadership was cut off. Coordination fractured. The Ka-29 helicopter never launched. Fire had already reached the rear platform. The aircraft was consumed in the blast wave. No radio message got through. No weapons were fired. By 3:22 a.m., the Cesar Kunikov was disabled, burning, and drifting near the earlier wrecks. The Black Sea was turning into a graveyard of Russian naval assumptions. 3 ships disabled. No Ukrainian flag in sight. The message was clear: this wasn't hit and run, this was controlled disassembly, and the next ship was already on the way. At 3:30 a.m., following the loss of 3 warships in under an hour, Russian Black Sea Fleet Command shifted strategy. They deployed the Kinenrad, another Rapucha-class landing ship, but this time with a more guarded posture. Unlike the previous vessels, the Kinenrad was escorted by aerial surveillance and ordered to maintain defensive readiness. Its objective was recovery and security. Ukrainian drones had not yet been identified, so Russian officers still assumed sabotage or mines, but they underestimated Ukraine's planning depth. Ukrainian command had already marked the Kaliningrad's most likely ingress path using a predictive model based on Russian rescue patterns. Magura VIF-5S drones had been programmed for long-duration submersion. 4 units waited beneath the surface in silence. On the surface, a UAV relayed positioning data in real time to ensure timing was exact. At 3:42 a.m., the Kinenrad entered the trap. The first drone struck without warning beneath the aft starboard hull. The explosion tore through auxiliary power lines, damaging both engine rooms. The ship shuddered. Seconds later, the second drone hit just under the vehicle deck, setting off fires among supply crates. Black smoke rose immediately. Crew scrambled to initiate suppression systems, but internal alarms began failing. The third drone approached from port and targeted the comms tower. It slammed into the mid-mast, severing long-range antennas and disabling the encrypted relay to Sevastopol. The final drone moved in from the stern. It didn't detonate immediately. Instead, it deployed a secondary sensor payload onto the hull, which began streaming diagnostics back to Ukrainian command. Only after collecting enough telemetry did it trigger a focused blast near the primary fuel tank. By 3:49 a.m., the Kinenrad had lost propulsion, power, and comms. Fires burned across 3 decks. Attempts to deploy lifeboats were halted as structural integrity failed on the starboard side. Ukrainian drones maintained visual range but did not finish the ship. There was no need. The message was already delivered. 4 ships, no enemy in sight, and no counterstrike possible. The Russian Navy was reacting on instinct. Ukraine was executing by design. But the next target wouldn't be a landing ship. It would be faster, deadlier, and more technologically advanced. And Ukraine was ready for that too. By 3:54 a.m., Russian command committed the Vladimir Paragudov, a Karakurt-class missile corvette designed for speed and electronic warfare. It carried Kaliber cruise missiles and state-of-the-art countermeasures. This wasn't a recovery mission, it was retaliation. Its orders were to identify the threat and engage. But Russia still didn't know what it was fighting. Ukraine did. The Paragudov was tracked from the moment it left formation. Ukrainian signals intelligence monitored its acceleration, propulsion rhythm, and digital emissions. That data was fed to a submerged Magura V-5S drone positioned northeast of Snake Island. Its acoustic sensors waited for a unique signature, the Paragudov's propulsion harmonics. At 3:58 a.m., it confirmed contact. The first strike came from beneath. The drone breached the aft engine compartment, severing fuel flow and disabling half the ship's propulsion. The Paragudov slowed instantly. Moments later, 2 surface drones emerged at speed. One was intercepted by the ship's CIWS. The second reached the starboard side and hit just below the radar mast, fracturing the integrated targeting system. The crew responded quickly, deploying countermeasures and scrambling to assess damage. But Ukraine had already neutralized their advantage. A third drone began electronic jamming, targeting the ship's communication and navigation links. Within seconds, all data feeds to Sevastopol went dark. The Paragudov was now isolated. Its long-range weapons were intact but blind. It could not acquire targets. It could not receive orders. A fourth drone hovered above the deck without attacking. Instead, it released micro-sensor pods that latched onto the hull and began relaying structural feedback to Ukrainian controllers. The ship had become a real-time laboratory. Ukrainian analysts watched in silence as the Paragudov systems failed, one by one. At 4:03 a.m., the final strike came. A delayed fuse drone breached the missile bay from below. It detonated near the Kaliber housing. The result was catastrophic. The corvette's midsection erupted. Flames reached the bridge. Multiple compartments flooded. But Ukraine didn't finish the vessel. It wasn't necessary. The Paragudov had been silenced, blinded, and gutted without ever firing a shot. Ukraine had demonstrated dominance not by destruction, but by denying combat entirely. And now only one ship remained, a vessel whose entire purpose was to observe, command, and listen. The Yuri Ivanov was already in range. At 4:12 a.m., the final piece of the Russian formation entered the zone. The Yuri Ivanov, a Vishnya-class electronic intelligence ship, was not built for combat. It carried no cruise missiles, no artillery. Its power came from information. It monitored frequencies, intercepted signals, and served as the neural hub for regional naval operations. After the Vladimir Paragudov went dark, Russian command depended on the Yuri Ivanov to re-establish battlefield clarity. But Ukraine had anticipated this move long before the first drone launched. 6 Magura V-5 drones were reserved specifically for this ship. Each carried a unique payload, 1 for broadband jamming, 1 for antenna disruption, 2 for propulsion strikes, 1 for radar obfuscation, 1 for final breach. They approached in layers, guided by encrypted satellite feed and ISR drone tracking. At 4:18 a.m., the first drone fired a jamming burst, flooding the Yuri Ivanov's communication channels. Russian technicians lost satellite sync. Data streams vanished. Seconds later, the antenna disruption drone slammed into the main sensor dome. Sparks rained over the deck as the array collapsed. The crew attempted reboot procedures, but the ship's mission system was crippled. Then the engine attacks began. 2 drones struck simultaneously from opposite sides, disabling the starboard and port shafts. The ship lost mobility. Emergency lighting flickered on. The bridge reported total propulsion loss. The Yuri Ivanov was dead in the water. A 5th drone flew overhead and deployed decoy flares and reflective chaff. The ship's sensors, already damaged, now saw hundreds of false targets. Radar failed entirely. The crew could not detect or defend. At 4:25 a.m., the final drone performed a precision dive, targeting the ship's central relay compartment. The explosion didn't rip the ship apart. It didn't need to. The blast took down the power grid, disabled emergency beacons, and erased the last backup transmission. The Yuri Ivanov went dark. In less than 2 hours, 6 ships had been eliminated, paralyzed, or left drifting. Not one had fired a missile in return. Not one had seen its attacker. Ukraine had launched no manned aircraft. No warships crossed the line of engagement. The Black Sea, once dominated by visible force, was now controlled by invisible calculation. And with the Yuri Ivanov gone, Russia was blind. By the end of July 2024, one fact was undeniable. Ukraine had redrawn the map of modern naval warfare. Through silence, deception, and electronic mastery, it had achieved what few thought possible: dominance over the Black Sea without a traditional navy. No massive fleets, no missile destroyers, just precision drones, layered signal warfare, and real-time command. Each operation wasn't just a strike, it was a statement. Russian vessels were no longer free to maneuver unchallenged. Each patrol became a risk. Every reinforcement route turned into a potential kill zone. The message was unmistakable. Control no longer belonged to the biggest ship, but to the sharpest signal. Behind every success was a pattern: multi-domain coordination, misdirection, rapid intelligence capture. Where Russia relied on doctrine and firepower, Ukraine used networks and algorithms. In this new era, sovereignty wasn't measured in steel, it was measured in milliseconds. But this transformation carries its own dangers. As drones replace sailors and AI replaces radar, the margin for error narrows. One wrong signal, one misidentified radar blip, and escalation becomes catastrophe. The Black Sea has become the testing ground for future war. What Ukraine achieved in weeks will redefine decades of maritime conflict. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe, like, and comment to support the channel. Because in a world of silent battles, truth must speak louder than noise.